The starfield stretched endlessly before Admiral Jake Morrison as he stood on the observation deck of the TNS Defiance. Humanity's most advanced warship hung in the void at the edge of the outer rim, a solitary sentinel guarding the frontier of Terran space. Morrison's weathered face reflected in the transparent aluminum viewport, lines etched by 2 decades of command decisions that had shaped the defense of humanity's expanding reach. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission," Captain Lisa Hayes announced as she entered the observation deck. Her uniform bore the sleek insignia of the Terran Naval Service, silver against midnight blue. "It's coming through on the diplomatic channel." Morrison turned, eyes narrowing. The diplomatic channel had remained silent for nearly 50 years. "Put it through to my private office. And Captain, notify Emperor Kane's office immediately." "Yes, sir," Hayes nodded, her expression betraying the same concern that Morrison felt rippling through his gut. As Morrison strode through the corridors of the Defiance, crew members saluted crisply. The ship represented the pinnacle of human engineering, built in the orbital shipyards of Mars, equipped with the latest advancements in propulsion, weaponry, and defensive systems. Yet, for all its power, Morrison knew the Defiance was merely one vessel in a dangerous galaxy. Inside his office, Morrison activated the secure terminal. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a formal diplomatic seal he had only seen in historical records, the 16-pointed star of the Galactic Council, each point representing one of the founding species that had governed interstellar affairs for millennia before humanity's emergence. The message began without preamble, the translation software converting the Council's formal language into standard English. "To the governing authority of the territorial expansion known as the Terran Empire, greetings. The Galactic Council, having observed with growing concern the unregulated expansion of human settlements across 23 star systems without proper authorization or tribute, hereby issues the following directives. 1. All colonies established beyond the Sol system are to be surrendered to Council oversight within 30 standard days. 2. 80% of all military vessels are to be immediately decommissioned or transferred to Council control. 3. A tribute of 40% of all industrial output is to be remitted annually to the Council Treasury. 4. Permanent Council observers will be stationed at all major human settlements to ensure compliance. Failure to acknowledge and comply with these directives will result in the Council taking necessary corrective measures. We await your formal submission." The message ended, leaving Morrison staring at the fading hologram. 200 years of careful expansion, of avoiding direct confrontation with the Council while building strength, had just come to an end. The quiet dance was over. Morrison's finger hovered over the communications panel before pressing firmly. "Captain Hayes, set course for Earth. Maximum speed." "Sir?" Hayes' voice contained a note of surprise. The Defiance was scheduled to complete its patrol of the Outer Rim before returning. "The Council has just declared war, Captain," Morrison replied grimly. "They just don't know it yet." 12 hours later, Morrison stood in the Imperial War Room beneath New Geneva, the circular chamber, buried deep within the reinforced bunker complex that had been constructed in the aftermath of the Great Devastation, housed the nerve center of humanity's military command. Emperor Alexander Kane sat at the head of the obsidian table, his tall frame imposing even while seated. Unlike the gaudy, ceremonial rulers of Earth's past, Kane wore a simple black uniform with minimal insignia, a reminder of his origins as a fleet commander before his elevation to political leadership following the constitutional crisis 20 years prior. "Play it again," Kane instructed, his deep voice filling the chamber as the Council's ultimatum was replayed for the assembled leadership. General Patricia Stone, commander of the Terran ground forces, leaned forward, her cybernetically enhanced eyes glowing faintly as she analyzed the message. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a demand for surrender." "Precisely," Admiral Helen Carter agreed, Her responsibility for the Inner Systems Defense Fleet made her particularly sensitive to threats against Earth and the core colonies. "They're asking us to dismantle everything we've built since the Exodus." Dr. Benjamin Clark, director of the Prometheus Advanced Research Division, remained silent, his fingers steepled before him. Unlike the others, he wore civilian clothes, a simple white lab coat over practical attire. His presence at this highest-level meeting spoke volumes about the severity of the situation. Kane's eyes moved methodically around the table, measuring each of his advisors before speaking. "The Council has miscalculated. They assume we will fold because every other emerging species has done so for the past 10,000 years. They see our careful avoidance of their core territories as weakness." His fist clenched slowly on the table. "They are mistaken." Morrison felt a chill at the Emperor's tone. Unlike his predecessors, Kane had never sought expansion for its own sake. His policies had focused on consolidation, infrastructure, and defensive capabilities rather than conquest. Yet Morrison recognized the steel beneath the measured exterior. "What are our options?" Morrison asked, directing the question to the room at large. General Stone activated the holographic display at the center of the table. A three-dimensional map of known space materialized, with Terran territories highlighted in blue and Council-controlled systems in red. The disparity was immediately apparent. Humanity controlled barely 24 systems, while the Council's influence spanned hundreds. "Conventional military assessment suggests we can't win a direct confrontation," Stone stated bluntly. "Their Grand Armada outnumbers our combined fleets by approximately 7-1. Even with our technological advantages in some areas, sustained warfare would eventually deplete our resources." "Diplomatic options?" Kane inquired, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Admiral Carter shook her head. "The Council doesn't negotiate with lesser species. Historical records show their pattern: deliver ultimatum, receive submission, or crush resistance. There are no recorded instances of the Council reversing demands once issued." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Morrison studied the stellar map, mind racing through scenarios, each ending in either subjugation or devastating loss of life. "Dr. Clark," Kane said suddenly, "it's time." All eyes turned to the scientist, who nodded slowly, his expression grave. "The Prometheus technologies are ready for deployment, Your Majesty, though we've only run simulations rather than full-scale tests." Morrison exchanged glances with General Stone. The Prometheus project had been classified at the highest level, with information compartmentalized even among the military leadership. "Explain," Morrison requested, directing his attention to Clark. Dr. Clark stood and approached the holographic display. With a series of gestures, he replaced the stellar map with technical schematics. "For the past 15 years, the Prometheus Division has been developing technologies specifically designed to counter potential Council aggression. 3 key innovations are ready for immediate implementation." The display shifted to show what appeared to be an advanced torpedo. First, quantum torpedoes. Unlike conventional antimatter weapons, these create a localized rupture in space-time, effectively removing a sphere of matter approximately 1 kilometer in diameter from existence. No radiation, no shockwave, just absence where matter once was. Stone whistled softly. "That would cut through Council shields like they weren't there." "Precisely," Clark confirmed. "Their defensive technology relies on energy dissipation. You can't dissipate what ceases to exist." The display changed again, showing a modified engine configuration. Second, stealth warp technology. By manipulating subspace fields, our ships can travel at warp speeds without generating the usual subspace distortions that sensors detect. Effectively, we can move our fleets undetected. Morrison leaned forward, mind racing with tactical possibilities. "Deployment timeline?" "We can begin retrofitting key vessels immediately," Clark replied. "The Jupiter shipyards have been manufacturing components under the guise of conventional upgrades for months. The first squadron could be operational within 72 hours. And the third technology? Kane prompted, his voice unnervingly calm. Clark hesitated, then nodded grimly. The display changed once more, showing what appeared to be a small satellite. The Genesis Protocol. This represents our most powerful and most ethically complex development. The schematics expanded, revealing intricate internal components. These devices, when activated, can fundamentally alter matter and energy within a defined spatial radius. They can reshape asteroids into weaponized configurations, transform nebula gases into explosive compounds, or even alter local spacetime properties to create navigational hazards or tactical advantages. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Morrison found himself staring at the innocent-looking device, recognizing it for what it was, a weapon that weaponized reality itself. "My God," General Stone whispered, "you're talking about turning entire regions of space into weapons." "Yes," Clark acknowledged. "The ethical implications are significant. We can limit collateral damage by careful deployment, but this technology essentially allows us to use the battlefield itself against the enemy." Kane rose from his seat, circling the holographic display slowly. "I authorized the Prometheus project not because I wanted these weapons, but because I recognized that humanity needed options should the Council ever move against us." He paused, studying the Genesis device. "I had hoped they would never be necessary." Morrison understood the weight pressing on the Emperor. Born in the aftermath of Earth's near destruction during the Great Devastation, Kane had witnessed firsthand the consequences of humanity's unpreparedness. The constitutional monarchy he now led had been formed with a single core principle: never again would humanity face extinction because it failed to prepare. "Your orders, Your Majesty?" Morrison asked quietly. Kane's eyes met his, resolute and clear. "Full mobilization of all Terran forces. Immediate implementation of Prometheus technologies beginning with your flagship squadron. Admiral Morrison, Dr. Clark, prepare Genesis devices for strategic deployment." He turned to General Stone. "General, secure our colony worlds. Evacuate civilians from the outermost settlements if necessary, but make it appear routine. Training exercises or infrastructure updates. We don't want to telegraph our intentions." "And the Council ultimatum?" Admiral Carter asked. A cold smile touched Kane's lips. "We'll send our formal response on the 29th day. In the meantime, prepare for Operation Defiance." He gestured to the holographic display, which shifted back to the stellar map. "Admiral Morrison, you will lead the first engagement here, at Proxima Station. The Council maintains a monitoring outpost there, just beyond our claimed territory. When they move to enforce their ultimatum, that's where they'll stage their initial forces." Morrison studied the location, already formulating battle plans. "A preemptive strike?" "Precisely," Kane confirmed. "We hit them before they realize we're capable of fighting back. The psychological impact will be as important as the tactical advantage." As the meeting continued into detailed operational planning, Morrison felt the weight of history pressing down upon his shoulders. Humanity had fled a dying Earth 2 centuries ago, narrowly escaping extinction. They had rebuilt, expanded cautiously, always aware of the ancient powers that dominated the galaxy. Now, they faced a choice between submission and a war that would reshape the stars themselves. In his mind's eye, Morrison could already see the battle unfolding at Proxima Station, the first test of humanity's secret weapons against the might of a galactic empire that had never known defeat. The 29 days that followed the Council's ultimatum witnessed the greatest mobilization in human history. Shipyards across the Terran systems operated at maximum capacity, retrofitting vessels with technologies that had remained hidden for years. Military units rotated from outer colonies toward more defensible positions, replaced by automated systems and minimal crews to maintain the appearance of normal operations. Aboard the TNS Defiance, Morrison oversaw the installation of the new quantum torpedo launchers. The weapons looked deceptively simple, sleek cylinders that replaced the conventional photon torpedo tubes. Yet each represented a fundamental violation of what most species considered the laws of physics. Targeting systems calibrated. Admiral, Captain Hayes reported as they stood in the torpedo control room. Simulations show 99.7% accuracy at ranges up to 3 light seconds. Morrison nodded, studying the readouts. And the ethical constraints? Implemented as ordered. Sir, the targeting computer will not allow deployment against targets below a certain mass threshold. Hayes' expression remained professional, but Morrison detected her discomfort. No planetary bodies, no civilian stations. Good. Morrison placed a hand on the launcher housing. We're crossing a line with these weapons. Captain, it's essential we remember why we're doing this, and what lines we won't cross. Yes, sir. Hayes hesitated. The crew is talking. Rumors about what these can do. Let them talk, Morrison replied. Fear of these weapons may prove as valuable as their actual use. Later that day, Morrison gathered with his squadron commanders in the Defiance's Strategic Operations Center. 6 captains, each commanding one of the most advanced warships in the Terran fleet, listened intently as Morrison outlined the battle plan for Proxima Station. Intelligence confirms the Council has positioned 3 cruisers at the outpost, Morrison explained, indicating the tactical display. They're expected to be reinforced by a destroyer group when our deadline expires. Our objective is to eliminate these forces before the reinforcements arrive, sending a clear message about our capabilities and resolve. Captain Daniels of the TNS Intrepid raised a hand. Sir, with respect, even with our new weaponry, attacking Council vessels is unprecedented. No emerging species has ever successfully challenged Council military power. No emerging species has ever possessed quantum torpedoes or stealth warp drive, Morrison countered, or the will to use them. He expanded the tactical display, highlighting approach vectors. We'll arrive in Formation Delta, using stealth warp to position ourselves here, equidistant from each Council vessel. On my mark, all ships will fire a single quantum torpedo at their designated target, followed immediately by conventional weapons to eliminate any supporting craft. The entire engagement should last less than 60 seconds. The captains exchanged glances, the enormity of what they were about to undertake sinking in. These weren't simply orders for a military operation. This was the beginning of a war against the dominant power in the galaxy. Questions? Morrison asked. What about survivors, sir? Captain Keyes of the TNS Valiant inquired. Morrison had anticipated this. There will be escape pods. We will permit them to activate their emergency beacons after we've cleared the area. The Council needs to know what happened and who did it. As the briefing concluded, Morrison felt the familiar calm that preceded combat, the clarity that came with commitment to action. In 36 hours, humanity would announce its defiance not with words, but with a demonstration of power that would shatter the Council's assumptions forever. On the 28th day following the ultimatum, the TNS Defiance led its squadron through the silent void toward Proxima Station. The stealth warp drive performed flawlessly, allowing the 6 Terran warships to approach without triggering the sophisticated sensor networks that the Council maintained throughout their territories. On the bridge, Morrison stood behind the tactical station, watching as the final coordinates were programmed. Status report. All systems optimal, Admiral. Hayes responded from her position at the command console. Quantum torpedoes armed and locked on targets. Conventional weapons systems standing by. Stealth systems functioning within parameters. Morrison nodded, studying the viewer that showed the 3 Council cruisers orbiting the station. Massive vessels with the distinctive crystalline protrusions that characterized Council design philosophy. Each was nearly twice the size of the Terran ships, bristling with weapons emplacements and protected by shields thought to be impenetrable. Open squadron channel, Morrison ordered. When Hayes nodded confirmation, he addressed his captains. "This is Admiral Morrison. In 5 minutes, we will execute the first military action against the Galactic Council in human history. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. Today, we declare that humanity will not submit, will not surrender its freedom or its future to any power, no matter how ancient or how vast." He paused, looking at the enemy vessels that still had no indication of the death approaching them from the darkness. "Remember your training, execute your orders precisely, and know that today, you fight not just for the Terran Empire, but for the right of all species to determine their own destiny." Morrison out. As the channel closed, Hayes looked up from her console. "Final positions achieved, Admiral. All ships report ready." Morrison took a deep breath, feeling the weight of centuries. "Fire!" 6 quantum torpedoes streaked through space, covering the distance to their targets in seconds. There was no dramatic explosion, no blinding flash, simply the sudden, impossible absence where portions of the Council cruisers had been. Massive vessels that had dominated space moments before were now fragmenting. Massive holes torn through their centers, where matter had simply ceased to exist. "Direct hits on all targets," the tactical officer reported, voice tight with controlled excitement. "Council vessels critically damaged." "Conventional weapons, fire," Morrison ordered calmly. Phaser beams and traditional torpedoes lashed out, targeting the crippled Council ship's remaining weapons and engines. Within moments, all 3 cruisers were effectively neutralized. Atmosphere venting from multiple breaches. Power systems failing. "Council station is powering up weapons," Hayes reported. "Target their primary power core. Quantum torpedo," Morrison commanded. A single torpedo launched from the Defiance, crossing the distance to the station in a heartbeat. Where the central section of the massive installation had been, a perfect sphere of emptiness appeared. Secondary explosions rippled outward as power conduits ruptured and atmosphere escaped. "Station neutralized," the tactical officer confirmed, detecting multiple escape pods launching from all targets. Morrison nodded grimly. "All ships, hold position. Allow the escape pods to clear the engagement zone." He turned to Hayes. "Begin broadcasting on all Council emergency frequencies." "Channel open," Hayes confirmed moments later. Morrison stepped forward. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran Naval Service. We have neutralized your forces at Proxima Station in response to your unprovoked ultimatum against our sovereign territory. The Terran Empire rejects all Council demands and asserts its right to independence and self-determination. Be advised that any further military action against Terran interests will be met with overwhelming force." He paused, then added, "We have permitted your personnel to evacuate to escape pods. Once we depart, they may activate emergency beacons for rescue. Consider this demonstration of restraint carefully before you decide on your next action." With a gesture, Morrison signaled Hayes to end the transmission. "Squadron, prepare to return to Terran space. Stealth warp protocols engaged." As the Terran vessels disappeared into the void, leaving destruction in their wake, Morrison knew that the Council would respond with fury, but also with fear. For the first time in millennia, they faced an opponent with both the will and the means to challenge their dominance. The real war was just beginning. In the crystalline chamber that served as the meeting place for the Galactic Council's ruling body, High Chancellor Veltar, of the Zoranth species, stood before the assembled representatives, fury emanating from all 4 of his eye stalks. "This outrage cannot stand," he declared, slamming a manipulator appendage against the podium. "These humans, these primitives, have dared to strike a direct blow against Council authority. 3 cruisers and a monitoring station, destroyed with technology that should be beyond their capability. Supreme Admiral Zethar, whose aquatic species required a specialized environment suit to survive in the atmospheric conditions of the chamber, moved forward. The survivors' reports are disturbing. They describe weapons that created holes in reality. Portions of our vessels simply ceased to exist. Furthermore, our sensor networks registered no approach of the human vessels. They appeared as if from nowhere. Warlord Thakron of the militaristic Krath Dominion rose from his seat, armor plates shifting as he moved. The humans must be crushed immediately. I propose dispatching the Grand Armada to their core worlds. We will make an example of them that will ensure no species dares such defiance for another 10,000 years. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. For most of the 16 founding species, the idea of an emerging race challenging council authority was not merely offensive. It was incomprehensible, a violation of the natural order. High Chancellor Veltar raised his appendages for silence. The Grand Armada will be mobilized, but we must proceed with caution. These humans have clearly developed technologies we did not believe them capable of. We must learn the extent of their capabilities before committing our full forces. Chancellor, Admiral Zethar interjected. Our intelligence suggests the humans have been preparing for this confrontation for years. The speed with which they responded to our ultimatum indicates pre-planning. All the more reason to crush them quickly, Thakron insisted. Before they can deploy more of these weapons. Veltar's eye stalks swiveled thoughtfully. We will dispatch a battle group to their colony at Epsilon Eridani. It is distant enough from their core worlds to avoid their main fleet, yet significant enough that its destruction will demonstrate our resolve. Based on the outcome, we will determine our strategy for the final subjugation of their species. As the council members voiced their approval, none noticed the silent observer at the back of the chamber, a representative of one of the younger council races, whose species had itself been forcibly incorporated into the council hierarchy only 3 centuries earlier. In his eyes gleamed something rarely seen in council chambers: hope. Meanwhile, on Earth, Emperor Cain addressed a joint session of the Terran Parliament, the elected body that shared governing authority with the constitutional monarchy. Representatives of humanity, Cain began, his voice carrying through the vaulted chamber of New Geneva's Parliament building. Today, I must inform you of a grave threat to our existence and the actions already taken to defend our people. He proceeded to outline the Council's ultimatum and the military response at Proxima Station. The chamber erupted in a mixture of shock, outrage, and fear as the implications became clear. "This is madness," shouted Representative Williams of the Mars colonies. "We've provoked the most powerful entity in the galaxy." "They provoked us," Cain responded calmly. "The choice was simple: submission or defiance. I chose defiance." Representative Chandra of the Asteroid Collective rose. "The collective supports your decision, Your Majesty. Better to die free than live as slaves. But what is our strategy moving forward? The Council commands resources we cannot match." Cain nodded toward Admiral Carter, who activated a holographic display at the center of the chamber. "For 2 decades, we have been preparing for this possibility," Cain explained. Operation Defiance has 3 phases. First, demonstration of our resolve and capabilities, which has been completed at Proxima Station. Second, strategic defense of key systems using our technological advantages. Third, a decisive engagement that will force the Council to recognize our sovereignty. The display showed the deployment of Terran forces throughout human-controlled space, with particular concentration around key colonies and resource centers. "We anticipate the Council will test our defenses before committing their Grand Armada," Admiral Carter explained. "Based on historical patterns, they will likely target a mid-level colony to demonstrate their power without risking a direct assault on Earth or Mars." "And you're confident we can repel such an attack?" Representative Williams demanded. "Yes," Cain answered simply. "What you must understand is that this conflict will not be decided by conventional metrics of military power. The Council's advantage lies in numbers and industrial capacity. Our advantage lies in innovation and the element of surprise. They have never faced a species that could challenge them technologically." He gestured, and the display changed to show schematics of the Prometheus technologies. These weapons and defensive systems represent paradigm shifts in warfare. The Council's military doctrine has remained largely unchanged for millennia, because it has never needed to evolve. We will exploit this stagnation. And if we fail? Williams pressed. Kane's expression hardened. Then humanity will fall. But we will not fall easily, and we will not fall alone. I believe there are other species within the Council's grasp that chafe under their rule. Our defiance may inspire others. The debate continued for hours. But in the end, the Parliament voted overwhelmingly to support the Emperor's actions. The Terran Empire was officially at war with the Galactic Council, a conflict many believed impossible to win, yet equally impossible to avoid. As predicted by Terran intelligence, the Council's response came at Epsilon Eridani. 8 days after the Proxima Station engagement, a Council battle group consisting of 5 heavy cruisers and 12 destroyer-class vessels emerged from warp near the human colony world. They found waiting for them not the light defensive force they had expected, but Admiral Morrison's squadron, now expanded to 12 ships, all retrofitted with Prometheus technologies. The battle that followed lasted less than 20 minutes. The Council vessels, approaching in standard combat formation, found themselves targeted by precisely placed quantum torpedoes that ignored their shields and removed critical sections of their ships from existence. Those that survived the initial barrage faced Terran vessels that seemed to blink in and out of detection, appearing at unexpected vectors to deliver devastating strikes before disappearing again. When the engagement ended, the entire Council battle group had been neutralized with the loss of only 2 Terran vessels. More importantly, the engagement had been broadcast throughout Terran space and, through covert channels, to various worlds under Council control. The message was clear: humanity would not be easy prey. In the days that followed, similar scenarios played out across the frontier of Terran space. Council forces, accustomed to overwhelming enemies through superior numbers and firepower, found themselves outmaneuvered by ships they couldn't track and facing weapons that bypassed their most sophisticated defenses. But Kane and Morrison knew these were merely probing attacks. The real test would come when the Council committed the Grand Armada, a force of over 3,000 vessels that had not been fully mobilized in over 2,000 years. In the Prometheus research facility beneath the Olympus Mons crater on Mars, Dr. Benjamin Clark supervised the final preparations of the Genesis devices. Unlike the quantum torpedoes, which had been deployed immediately, the Genesis protocol represented a far more complex ethical and technical challenge. Each device must be precisely calibrated for its target environment. Clark explained to Admiral Morrison, who had returned to the Sol system to oversee the final phase of preparations. The effects cannot simply be turned off once initiated. They will continue until the program transformation is complete. They stood in a massive underground chamber where dozens of the small, innocent-looking devices were being prepared by teams of scientists and engineers. Each Genesis unit was approximately the size of a standard data module, its exterior deceptively simple. "And you're certain about the containment parameters?" Morrison asked, watching as a technician made microscopic adjustments to one of the devices. "We can't risk these effects spreading beyond the designated zones." Clark nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "The spatial boundaries are defined by quantum-locked fields that cannot be breached by the transformative effects." "But Admiral..." He hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "We're fundamentally altering the nature of reality within those boundaries. The ethical implications are profound." Morrison placed a hand on the scientist's shoulder. "I understand your concerns, Doctor. Believe me, I share them. But we must weigh those implications against the alternative: subjugation of our entire species, the end of human self-determination." "I know," Clark sighed. "I just never imagined my life's work would be used this way." The Genesis protocol was designed to terraform uninhabitable worlds, to create environments where life could flourish. Now, we're using it as the ultimate weapon, If we succeed, Morrison reminded him, it will only need to be used once. The Council must understand that continuing this war means facing weapons they cannot counter. Their conversation was interrupted by a priority alert. Morrison activated his communicator to find Captain Hayes' grim face on the display. Admiral, long-range sensors have detected warp signatures consistent with the Grand Armada departing Council space. Estimated time to Wolf 359 is 72 hours. Morrison exchanged glances with Clark. Wolf 359 was the location Terran intelligence had predicted for the Council's main thrust. A star system, just beyond the edge of heavily defended human space, with a dense asteroid field that could provide tactical advantages to a numerically superior force. It's time, Morrison said. Begin loading the Genesis devices aboard the designated vessels. I'll return to the Defiance immediately. As Morrison departed, Clark returned to his work, the weight of humanity's future pressing down upon his shoulders. The Genesis devices would soon reshape not just matter and energy, but the course of galactic history itself. Emperor Kane stood before the view screen in the Imperial Command Center, watching the final deployment of Terran forces. The holographic display showed the positions of every combat-capable vessel in human space, nearly 400 ships, from massive dreadnoughts to agile corvettes. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, and it was about to face an enemy that outnumbered it nearly 8-1. All fleet elements report ready, Your Majesty, Admiral Carter announced from her station. Admiral Morrison's battle group has reached Wolf 359 and is implementing the preliminary phase of Operation Firestorm. Kane nodded, studying the tactical overlay that showed the approach vectors of the Council's Grand Armada. And the civilian evacuations? Complete for all outer colonies, General Stone reported. Core worlds are at Defense Condition 1, with civilian shelters activated and emergency protocols in place. Good. Kane turned to address the assembled leadership. What we do today will determine the future not just of humanity, but potentially of all species that have labored under Council dominance. If we succeed, we create the possibility of a new order in the galaxy, one based on cooperation rather than subjugation. He activated a communication channel. Admiral Morrison, status report. Morrison's face appeared on the view screen, the bridge of the Defiance visible behind him. Genesis devices deployed as planned. Your Majesty, teams are finalizing the activation sequences. The asteroid field has been seeded with quantum mines, and our fleet is positioned according to the battle plan. The Council forces? Approaching on schedule, long-range sensors confirm approximately 3,000 vessels, including the Arbitrator. Morrison referred to the Council's Super Dreadnought, a vessel that served as both the flagship of the Grand Armada and a mobile seat of Council authority, a symbol of their absolute power. Very well. Kane straightened, his decision made. You are authorized to execute Operation Firestorm upon enemy arrival. May fortune favor the bold, Admiral. Thank you, Your Majesty. Morrison's expression was solemn. Defiance out. As the communication ended, Kane turned back to the tactical display. In his mind's eye, he could already see the battle unfolding, the most significant military engagement in human history, perhaps in galactic history. Everything they had built, everything they had planned for, would be tested in the crucible of Wolf 359. Aboard the Council flagship Arbitrator, Supreme Admiral Zethar reviewed the final approach to the human-controlled system. The massive vessel, over 5 kilometers in length, dwarfed even the largest Terran dreadnoughts. Its central command chamber could accommodate representatives of all 16 founding species, allowing the Council to witness firsthand the subjugation of this unexpectedly troublesome race. The human defenders have positioned themselves throughout the asteroid field, reported the tactical officer, a member of Zethar's own aquatic species. Approximately 400 vessels detected. As expected, Zethar replied. They seek to use the terrain to compensate for their numerical disadvantage, a standard tactic for primitive species. High Chancellor Veltar, who had chosen to personally observe the operation, moved his eye stalks dismissively. These humans have proven resourceful, but the outcome is inevitable. No emerging species has ever withstood the full might of the Grand Armada. Warlord Thakron, clad in ceremonial battle armor, growled his agreement. Their resistance at Proxima Station and Epsilon Eridani was impressive, but ultimately futile. Today, we will remind the galaxy why the Council has ruled unopposed for 10,000 years. Deploy the fleet in subjugation pattern Alpha, Zethar commanded. All vessels will advance through the asteroid field and engage the human ships. Priority targets are their command vessels and any ships equipped with their new weapons technology. As the Grand Armada began its approach, none of the Council leaders noticed the small, innocuous devices attached to key asteroids throughout the field. Nor did they detect the subtle spatial distortions beginning to form at the edges of the system. The first indications that the Genesis Protocol had been activated. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the TNS Defiance, watching as the Council Armada entered the Wolf 359 system. The massive formation of vessels stretched across the viewscreen, an armada of unprecedented size and power, advancing with a confidence born of millennia of unchallenged dominance. All ships maintain positions, Morrison ordered through the fleet-wide channel. Genesis control. Status. All devices online and synchronized. Admiral, came the response from Dr. Clark, who was coordinating the operation from a specialized control center aboard the Defiance. Awaiting your command to initiate primary sequence. Morrison studied the tactical display, confirming that the Council forces had passed the predetermined threshold. They had entered the trap, committed their forces to the asteroid field where the Genesis devices waited. Initiate Genesis Protocol. Authorization Morrison Alpha 79. Confirmed, Clark responded. Genesis activation in 3, 2, 1, mark. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, sensor readings began to change. The asteroids throughout the field, massive chunks of rock and ice that had orbited Wolf 359 for billions of years, began to shift, their molecular structure altering at the most fundamental level. Council vessels are registering the spatial distortions, Hayes reported from her station. They're adjusting course, attempting to bypass the affected areas. Morrison nodded grimly. Exactly as expected. Tactical. Target their course corrections with quantum torpedoes. Drive them back into the transformation zones. As the Terran fleet engaged, targeting key Council vessels with precision strikes, the Genesis effect accelerated. Asteroids began to merge and reshape, forming massive, crystalline structures that grew toward the Council ships. Some asteroids developed gravitational anomalies, pulling enemy vessels off course and into the path of others. At the edges of the system, the diffuse nebula gases that had surrounded Wolf 359 underwent their own transformation, condensing into energized plasma that surged toward the Council fleet in massive waves. Vessels caught in these waves found their shields overloaded, their hull integrity compromised by energies that shouldn't have existed naturally. Council fleet is attempting to regroup, Hayes announced, urgency in her voice. They're consolidating around the arbitrator. Morrison studied the tactical display, watching as the Council flagship gathered its escorts into a defensive formation. Phase 2, he ordered. Activate the spatial distortion matrix. This represented the most ambitious application of the Genesis technology, the manipulation of space-time itself within the defined operational area. As Dr. Clark activated the final sequence, subspace rifts began to form throughout the battlefield, creating unpredictable navigational hazards that the Council ships, with their rigid tactical doctrine, were ill-equipped to handle. Council communications indicate widespread confusion. The communications officer reported, "They're attempting to coordinate a withdrawal." "Not yet," Morrison said quietly. Target the arbitrator. All ships with quantum torpedoes. Converge and fire on my mark. The TNS Defiance and 5 other Terran vessels moved into position, using their stealth warp technology to approach the Council flagship from multiple vectors. The massive vessel, despite its impressive defenses, had no answer for weapons that bypassed shields and armor to remove portions of its structure from existence. "Fire!" Morrison commanded. 6 quantum torpedoes struck the arbitrator simultaneously, creating massive voids where critical systems had been. The flagship's lights flickered, then died, as secondary explosions rippled through its vast hull. "Direct hits confirmed," the tactical officer reported. "Arbitrator has lost primary power and propulsion. Life support failing on multiple decks." "Council fleet is breaking formation," Hayes added. "We're detecting mass activations of emergency warp drives. They're retreating. Admiral." Morrison watched as the once mighty Grand Armada dissolved into chaos. Vessels fleeing in all directions as the transformed asteroids, energized nebula, and spatial distortions claimed hundreds of ships. The carefully orchestrated application of the Genesis Protocol had turned the entire Wolf 359 system into a weapon against which the Council had no defense. "Cease fire," Morrison ordered. "Allow them to retreat. Captain Hayes, open a channel to the arbitrator." When the connection was established, Morrison addressed the Council leadership directly. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran Naval Service. Your fleet is defeated. Your flagship crippled. We will permit evacuation of your damaged vessels and will not pursue those retreating. But know this. What you witnessed today was merely one application of technologies we possess. Should you choose to continue this conflict, we are prepared to deploy similar measures throughout Council space." He paused, allowing the implications to sink in. "The Terran Empire offers terms, recognition of our sovereignty, non-interference in our affairs, and the establishment of diplomatic relations based on mutual respect rather than domination. Consider carefully before you respond." As the transmission ended, Morrison turned to find Captain Hayes watching him, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "Will they accept?" she asked quietly. "Some will," Morrison replied. "Others will rage against the new reality. But the myth of Council invincibility has been shattered today. That alone changes everything." He looked back at the view screen, where the transformed battlefield of Wolf 359 continued its unnatural evolution. "Our real challenge begins now, using this victory to build a peace that can last." The Battle of Wolf 359 marked a turning point, but not the end of the conflict. While many Council member species, particularly those more recently incorporated, advocated for accepting the human terms, others, led by the militant Krath Dominion, refused to acknowledge defeat. 3 weeks after Wolf 359, as diplomatic channels tentatively opened between moderate Council representatives and the Terran Empire, a splinter fleet composed primarily of Krath warships launched a desperate strike against the Sol system itself. Their target, Earth, the cradle of humanity. Emperor Cain stood in the Sol System Defense Command Center beneath Olympus Mons as the alert klaxons sounded. "Report!" he demanded, striding to the central tactical display. 67 Council vessels have bypassed our outer detection grid," Admiral Carter reported. "They're on direct approach to Earth, using some form of enhanced warp signature masking. Estimated arrival in 22 minutes. Cain's expression hardened. "Activate the Sol Defense Network. All planetary shields to maximum. Launch the home fleet." The Sol Defense Network represented humanity's ultimate failsafe, a comprehensive, multi-layered system designed to protect the birthplace of human civilization at all costs. Unlike the offensive Prometheus technologies, these defensive measures had been incorporated into the very infrastructure of the solar system over decades. As the Krath fleet approached, they encountered the first layer of defense, automated platforms positioned at the heliopause, the boundary where the solar wind met interstellar space. These platforms generated targeted gravitational distortions that forced the attacking vessels to drop out of warp prematurely, disrupting their carefully planned assault timeline. Next came the outer system defenses, disguised as scientific outposts on Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. These installations housed powerful energy weapons that could target ships at extreme ranges. The Krath vessels, now moving at sublight speeds, found themselves under unexpected fire long before reaching their target. But the most impressive element of the Sol defense network awaited them within the inner system. Here, humanity had spent generations building defenses that integrated directly with the natural features of their home system. Massive solar collectors positioned near Mercury's orbit suddenly reoriented, focusing the star's energy into coherent beams that lashed out at the approaching warships. Artificial gravity wells activated near the asteroid belt, creating navigational hazards that forced the Krath fleet to break formation or risk collision. And in Earth orbit, the combined Terran home fleet, nearly 200 vessels that had remained behind specifically to guard humanity's homeworld, moved to intercept the attackers. "The Krath commander is broadcasting," the communications officer announced. "Audio only." "Let me hear it," Kane ordered. A harsh, guttural voice filled the command center. "Humans, your trickery at Wolf 359 will not save you here. The Krath Dominion does not recognize your victory or your terms. We will reduce your homeworld to ash as an example to all who would defy the Council's authority." Kane's response was calm but resolute. "Whoever you are, you've made a grave miscalculation. Wolf 359 was not our only defense, nor our most potent. This is humanity's cradle. Do you truly believe we would leave it vulnerable?" Without waiting for a response, he turned to Admiral Carter. "Activate the final defensive layer. Authorization Kane Omega-3. Carter nodded grimly, inputting the command sequence into her console. Throughout the solar system, carefully positioned Genesis devices, smaller and more precisely calibrated than those used at Wolf 359, activated simultaneously. The effect was subtle at first, then increasingly dramatic. The solar wind itself began to change composition, ionizing into plasma filaments that reached out toward the Krath vessels, like the tentacles of some vast cosmic organism. The Earth's magnetosphere expanded and intensified, creating a defensive shell that deflected enemy weapons fire. Most spectacularly, portions of the lunar surface transformed, launching crystalline projectiles that homed in on the Krath warships with unerring accuracy. These were not conventional weapons, but manifestations of the Genesis protocol's ability to reshape matter according to programmed parameters. The Krath fleet, already damaged by the conventional defenses, found itself overwhelmed by phenomena that defied their understanding of physics. Ships were ensnared in plasma filaments, crushed by gravitational spikes, or shattered by crystal formations that grew exponentially upon contact with their hulls. "Enemy vessels attempting to retreat," Carter reported. 39 destroyed or disabled, remainder breaking off attack. Kane watched the tactical display, where the remnants of the Krath fleet were scattering, some attempting to flee the system, while others surrendered to the encircling Terran vessels. "The Sol defense network performed beyond expectations," Carter noted, reviewing the data. "Civilian casualties, 0. Military losses, minimal. Earth is secure." Kane nodded, relief visible in his features despite his controlled demeanor. "Broadcast throughout Terran space and on all Council frequencies. Earth stands unharmed. The attempted strike has been repelled with minimal losses on our side. We remain open to diplomatic resolution with those Council species who recognize our sovereignty, but we will respond with overwhelming force to any further aggression." As the message was transmitted, Kane turned to General Stone, who had observed the defense in silence. "Contact Admiral Morrison. Tell him it's time for the final phase. Not military action, but diplomacy backed by the reality of what we've demonstrated today." The general nodded. "You believe they'll negotiate now?" "Some already were," Kane replied. After this failure, even the hardliners will have to reconsider. No Council fleet has ever been defeated. Yet we've now done so twice. Once on our terms at Wolf 359, and now in defense of our homeworld. The myth of their invincibility is shattered beyond repair. In the days that followed, the political landscape of the galaxy transformed with unprecedented speed. The Krath Dominion's unauthorized attack and subsequent defeat had fractured the Council's unity. Species that had chafed under Council rule for centuries saw in humanity's success an opportunity for greater autonomy or even independence. 1 month after the Battle of Earth, representatives from the Terran Empire and 12 Council species gathered on Haven, a neutral world at the edge of what had once been uncontested Council space. Here, in open defiance of the traditional Council hierarchy, they began negotiations for what would become known as the Terran Accords. Admiral Morrison, appointed as humanity's chief negotiator due to his pivotal role in the conflict, stood on the balcony of the conference center, gazing out at the twin moons of Haven rising over the horizon. The world had been chosen for its symbolic value, a planet that had never been colonized, preserving a pristine environment that reminded all parties of what could be lost in prolonged conflict. "Magnificent, isn't it?" said a voice behind him. Morrison turned to find Dr. Benjamin Clark joining him at the railing. The scientist looked tired but satisfied, the weight of the Genesis Protocol's deployment partially lifted from his shoulders. "It is," Morrison agreed. "Hard to believe that 2 months ago, we were preparing for what might have been the extinction of our species." Clark nodded thoughtfully. "Instead, we've reshaped the political structure of the galaxy. Not bad for an emerging species." Morrison smiled briefly, then grew serious. "The question now is whether we can build something better than what came before. Power such as we've demonstrated comes with tremendous responsibility. That's why Emperor Kane sent you, rather than coming himself," Clark observed. "He knows you understand both the military necessity that brought us here and the ethical complexities of what follows." Their conversation was interrupted by Captain Hayes, who approached with a data tablet. "Admiral, the delegates are ready to resume. The Zoranth representative has prepared a draft framework for the new Interstellar Assembly." Morrison nodded, taking a deep breath. "Very well, let's make history." The negotiation chamber was arranged in a circle, with no position of prominence, a deliberate contrast to the hierarchical arrangement of the traditional council chamber. Representatives of species that had been enemies mere weeks before now engaged in intense but productive dialogue about shared future. High Chancellor Veltar, representing the moderate faction of the original council, addressed the assembly. "Recent events have demonstrated that the old order is no longer sustainable. For too long, the Council has enforced stability through dominance rather than cooperation. The humans have shown us not only the limits of this approach, but an alternative path forward." Warlord Thakron, his once imposing presence diminished by the defeat of his forces, growled his disagreement. "The humans won through trickery and forbidden technologies. Their victory proves nothing except that they are dangerous and unpredictable." "With respect, Warlord," Morrison interjected calmly, "we won because we innovated while the Council stagnated. For millennia, you relied on overwhelming numbers and the fear inspired by past subjugations. When faced with an opponent who refused to be intimidated and who developed technologies you had not anticipated, your doctrine failed." He stood, addressing the entire assembly. "But this gathering is not about assigning blame or claiming victory. It is about recognizing a fundamental truth, that cooperation between equals creates greater strength than domination of the many by the few." Morrison activated the central display, showing a proposed structure for the new Interstellar Assembly. The Terran Accords establish a framework where all signatory species retain their sovereignty while agreeing to basic principles of mutual respect and non-interference. Military power will be balanced, with no single species or alliance permitted to build forces capable of threatening the whole. He continued, outlining provisions for trade, cultural exchange, and collective security that would replace the rigid hierarchy of the Council with a more flexible, consensual arrangement. As he spoke, Morrison could see the representatives of species long subjugated by the Council leaning forward. Hope, kindling in eyes and expressions, evolved for worlds far from Earth. Most importantly, Morrison concluded, membership will be voluntary. Those species that wish to maintain the old Council structure may do so, governing themselves as they see fit, but they must extend the same freedom to others. The debate continued for hours, then days, as the details of the new arrangement were negotiated. The Prometheus technologies, particularly the Genesis Protocol, featured prominently in discussions, with humanity offering to place strict limitations on their use in exchange for recognition of Terran sovereignty. Finally, after 7 days of intensive negotiation, the Terran Accords were ready for signing. As representatives of 14 species, 12 former Council members plus humanity, and 1 previously uncontacted civilization that had observed the proceedings, gathered for the ceremony. Morrison found himself standing beside Emperor Cain, who had arrived for the final day. "You've done well, Admiral," Cain said quietly. "These accords represent the best possible outcome from a conflict we did not choose, but could not avoid." Morrison nodded, watching as delegates approached the central table to apply their signatures or equivalent marks of agreement to the document. "What happens now, Your Majesty? We've demonstrated power that could reshape planets, alter space itself. How do we ensure it's never misused?" Cain's expression was solemn. "By remembering why we developed it in the first place, not for conquest or dominance, but to preserve our freedom and our future. The moment we begin using these technologies to impose our will on others, we become what we fought against." He gestured toward the assembly, where former enemies now conversed as tentative allies. "This is the real victory, Morrison. Not the battles we won, but the peace we've built. A peace based on respect rather than fear." As the signing ceremony concluded, representatives of the 14 founding species of the new assembly stood together on the stage, a physical embodiment of the new galactic order. The Terran Accords would not bring instant harmony. Centuries of Council dominance had created deep-seated resentments and suspicions that would take generations to heal. But they represented a beginning, a first step toward a more equitable relationship among the stars. Dr. Clark, watching from the audience, felt a profound sense of vindication. The technologies he had helped develop, intended originally to create rather than destroy, would now be redirected toward their original purpose. Already, discussions were underway about using modified Genesis devices to terraform uninhabitable worlds, creating new homes for species whose populations had outgrown their original planets. Captain Hayes found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the quiet observation deck of the Defiance, where Admiral Morrison had first received the Council's ultimatum, to this historic assembly that would reshape galactic civilization. The path had been marked by difficult decisions and actions that would be debated by historians for centuries to come. But the outcome, humanity standing as equals among the stars, rather than subjects of an ancient hierarchy, justified the cost. As the ceremony concluded, and the delegates dispersed to begin implementing the new arrangements, Morrison stood alone for a moment, gazing up at the star-filled sky visible through Haven's transparent dome. Somewhere out there, the transformed battlefield of Wolf 359 continued its unnatural evolution, a permanent reminder of both humanity's ingenuity and the responsibility that came with such power. The Council's ultimatum had indeed backfired, but the response it provoked had done more than secure humanity's freedom. It had created an opportunity for all species to reimagine their relationships with one another, to build connections based on choice rather than coercion. In the Imperial War Room beneath New Geneva, The holographic display now showed a very different map of known space, not divided into Terran and Council territories, but interconnected by the new diplomatic and trade relationships established under the Accords. Emperor Kane studied it thoughtfully, seeing not conquests, but possibilities. "We stand at a crossroads," he remarked to General Stone, who had joined him for a final review of the security protocols that would govern humanity's new role in the galaxy. For the first time in recorded history, the dominant power in known space has been successfully challenged, not just militarily, but philosophically. Stone nodded, her cybernetic eyes scanning the display. The question is whether the new assembly can succeed where the Council failed, balancing the interests of vastly different species without resorting to coercion. "It must," Kane replied simply. "The alternative is a return to conflict, but with weapons far more devastating than any we've seen before. The Genesis Protocol demonstrated that reality itself can be weaponized, a genie that cannot be returned to its bottle." He deactivated the display, his decision made. "Which is why our next priority must be establishing safeguards that transcend species boundaries. The Prometheus technologies will be placed under multinational oversight, with deployment requiring consensus among all signatories to the Accords." Stone raised an eyebrow. "Some will say you're surrendering our advantage." "No," Kane countered. "I'm ensuring it isn't needed again. The true measure of power isn't the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to know when not to." As news of the Terran Accords spread throughout known space, reactions varied from celebration to consternation. On worlds long dominated by Council authority, populations cautiously embraced the possibility of greater self-determination. Among the founding species of the Old Council, there was soul-searching about how their civilization had become what they had originally formed to oppose, a tyranny imposing its will through force rather than persuasion. For humanity, the aftermath of the conflict brought both opportunity and challenge. The technologies developed for war would need to be repurposed for peace. The fleet that had defended Terran space would become the backbone of a new cooperative security arrangement. And the psychological impact of confronting and defeating a seemingly invincible adversary would shape human culture for generations to come. Admiral Morrison, returning to the TNS Defiance for what might be his final voyage aboard the vessel, found Captain Hayes waiting on the observation deck where their journey had begun. "It's strange," Hayes remarked as they gazed out at the stars. 2 months ago, we stood here and received an ultimatum that might have meant the end of everything we've built. Now, we're architects of a new galactic order." Morrison nodded, feeling the weight of recent events. History often turns on such moments, decisions made under pressure that ripple outward in ways no one could have predicted. The Council never imagined their demand would lead to their own dissolution. "And what happens now, Admiral?" Hayes asked. "For the ship? For us?" Morrison smiled slightly. "The Defiance will become a symbol of the new era, the flagship of the Joint Security Force established under the Accords. As for us," he turned to face her directly, "we have the privilege and responsibility of helping build what comes next, a galaxy where strength serves freedom rather than oppression." As the Defiance prepared to depart for its new mission, escorting representatives of the former Council species back to their homeworlds to begin the process of implementing the Accords, Morrison took one last look at Earth shining below. The planet that had nearly been destroyed during the Great Devastation 2 centuries earlier, that had given birth to a species now helping reshape the political landscape of known space. The Council's ultimatum had demanded submission. Instead, it had catalyzed transformation, not just for humanity, but for countless species across the galaxy. In demanding surrender, they had inadvertently created the conditions for a new beginning, a chance to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear. As the Defiance engaged its warp drive and disappeared into the starfield, The silent expanse bore witness to the truth that had eluded the Council for millennia. True stability could never be imposed through force, only built through cooperation. The Terran Empire had not just survived. It had helped birth a new order in which freedom and responsibility walked hand in hand among the stars.